Okay, good morning. We're up to Siman Lamed Beis Sif Vov. So then we're now going to encounter a concept of sirtut. Sirtut means that you scratch, you draw a line, an invisible line on the klaf. If you ever wondered how is it that the writing of a Sefer Torah or Tefillin or Mezuzah is so perfectly straight? So there is a secret, and the secret is that the Sofer, or whoever is processing the hide, the klaf, he actually draws these sort of little scratches, these lines on the klaf borders, in order that he can write on those lines and make sure that it's perfectly straight. Now the Mechaber says that ein tzarich lesartet kiyem shitza elyona. The strict halach is that you only actually need to draw a line on the top line. That's it, because I guess that will make sure that the first line is straight and then the rest of it will follow. If, however, you're not confident that you're going to draw straight lines after that, then yesartet kol hashuros, you should make sure that every line that you write on the tefillin should have this sort of this line underneath it, or on top of it, to make sure that it's straight. V'lo yesartet ba'iferes, you shouldn't do the sirtut with lead, because then the line should be sort of plain, it should be invisible and not marked with any color, because the concern is that your letters will touch the line and will encounter other problems. Says the Ramah, you should do not only above and below, but also on the sides. In other words, you put a border to make sure that the beginning and end of each line is flush, is in line with each other. It shouldn't be longer or start in different places, and it should look beautiful. Even if you know how to do it without sirtut, you should still draw lines above, below, and on the sides. And that indeed is the practice. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Siman Sifkot and Chof. Shitza Elyona. So the Mechaber says the strict halach is you just have to do the top line. Mishum the tefillin ein oleh halach al Moshe Messina lesartet k'mo mezuzah. It's different to mezuzah. There is no halach al Moshe Messina telling us that we need to do sirtut, this scratching of the line, like it is with mezuzah. Mishum the osa lichtov gimel tevus in pasuk b'li sirtut, because it's also to write 3 words from a pasuk without sirtut. Al kain k'shemesartet shita elyona dai, and therefore, so long as you've got one line, the top line, that's sufficient. Kistam bnei adam, because most people, Sofer, yodim la'amen yodam, they can hold their hands securely. Lichtov kol hashitas yesharas achas shekosu shita elyona, because once they've got the first line straight, the rest will follow. V'ka'oma ein sorich, and that which it says ein sorich mishum dim yirtze lesartet kol hashitin, because the Mechaber agrees that if you want to write all the lines, lichtov yoser b'yosher liyafes hashitzes harashus biyado, because it will more likely be more beautiful, and therefore he's entitled to do so. If he doesn't even do that, doesn't even do the top line according to the Mechaber, what happens? So take a look in the Bir Halacha. The Bir Halacha concludes that the b'diavad it's mutter, that lemaisi should ideally do it, and if he didn't do it b'diavad, it's mutter. Okay, Sif Katan Chaf Aleph Yesartet Pirush Lechatchila. Ideally, mishum zeh kelivan veyu avil b'diavad afilu im lo sirted because of hashitas hakumos. But what if he did the top line and he thought the idea was that the rest of the lines would follow, would be nice and straight, but they weren't. They were crooked, or they bent, or they went up and down. Then b'diavad is actually okay. B'diavad im lo sirted because of hashitas hakumos ein lifsal tefillin, that does not puzzle the tefillin. Ba'iferes, Siman Chof, Sifkot and Chof Beis, V'chein B'dio, and so too with other ink, or V'sikra, other types of ink, V'chol Ki Yetze B'zeh, Afilu Ben Hashitin Osa Lesartet Bo. You're, even between the lines, you're not allowed to scratch it with some sort of color, with some sort of ink. V'chol Zeh Lechatchila, that is all ideally. Av B'di'eved, if B'di'eved, he did the sirtut with some sort of coloring, with some sort of ink, ein lahachmir, you don't have to be machmir, kein kosav alechem chamudus v'lirabo. V'tshuvas devar shmuel, simen shin samach beis, mefakvik b'zeh mo'ed, in mesurtet b'shum tseva shocher, if you use a black liner to mark the lines on the klaf, machmas negias ois ba'ois, because the concern is that an ois might touch the line, alidei hasirtut hashocher, and that could be a problem. Lo dekosav matachas hasirtut, unless you do it underneath the sirtut. Ein shom. Okay, Mitzvah will get that. Okay, now, just by the way, one quick ha'ara. Apart from the first line of the Tefillin and Mezuzah and Sefer Torah, where else is sirtut needed? Interestingly, it's only needed in Megillah. The Gemara says in Megillah that Megillah boy sirtut ka'amitus shel Torah. You need to have a sirtut, this is underscoring the lines before you write the Megillah. How come? How come of all the Kisvei Kodesh, the Sefer Torah of course needs, and Mezuzah needs, and the first line of the Tefillin needs, but why Megillah as well? So I once saw a beautiful pshat from Rabbi Zev Leff. He says an amazing idea. We know the whole idea of Megillah, the whole story of Purim, is that there's no overt miracles, there's no Kriyas Yamsuf, there's no HaKadosh Baruch Hu sort of interacting and intervening with nature. It all seems to be very natural. The whole story is a natural phenomenon. There's a king who gets drunk, who kills his wife, has a beauty pageant to find a new wife, etc., etc. It's all very natural events. However, we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is orchestrating all of it from above. There is Hashgacha Pratis, there is Hashgacha Klalis, there is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is puppeteering from on high. And to represent this, the Megillah needs sirtut. What is sirtut? You're underscoring lines before you even start the story. And the Sofer starts writing by Hibimeach Hashverosh, he's sort of following a hidden, invisible line that represents the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sort of unfolding the story along a pre-hidden line that is planned, as it were, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he allows the story to unfold in the natural way, but of course he is puppeteering from on high. Okay, let's carry on. Now, Halacha Zayin has no Mishnah Berurah. Let's take a look at the Mechaba. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai, says the Mechaba. Tefillin al klaf v'loy al ha-duchsustus. Tefillin has to be on klaf, on parchment, and not on duchsustus, which we'll define soon. V'loy al ha-gevil, again, koisvin al ha-klaf v'mokem bosa. You write on the klaf, on the part of the parchment which faces the flesh. V'im shina poslan. If you do it on the other side, i.e. the outside of the animal, the hair side of the animal, that's posel. Now, says the Mechaba, ma'u klaf or ma'u duchsustus. What actually are these two things? Ha'ar b'shas ibudoi, when you process the hide, cholkin oisod shnaim, you divide it into two. So imagine you flay the animal, and then you divide that skin into two. V'chelek ha'chitzoin, and the outer part, shehu letzad haseya, which has got the hair on it, which is the outer part of the hide of the skin, nikra klaf. That is called the klaf. V'hapnimi, in the inner part, which is connected to the flesh, hadovuk lebasar, nikra duchsustus. Ulufizeh. Therefore, we write on the klaf, which is the outer part of the skin. However, so we write on the klaf, we use klaf, which is on the outer, it's facing the outer side of the animal, not the part which is next to the flesh, but on the inside of that part. So imagine you've got the animal, and you flay the skin, and you therefore take the skin and you divide it into two. The part which is next to the bossa is the duchsustus. We don't use that. We use the part, the klaf, which is the outer side, but we use the inner side of that klaf, the part which faces the animal, the flesh of the animal. The part facing the flesh, i.e. the part of that side which face when you split it is attached, is next to the duchsustus. However, our klaf, where we do not divide it into two, we just flay the animal and use that skin, din klaf has got the din of klaf, and therefore v'kosfin olen letzad basar, we write on the inner side, the flesh side of that skin, shemesh shemegarim klipos v'lyon shemokum se'ah eina ela k'dei mashet tzorich lesakno alachlicho, and that which we scrape away the outer shell, b'mokum l'seah, is just to make sure to prepare it and to smooth it. And even if we were to split the skin into two, we would have to still scrape it. And against the flesh side, you have to scrape away quite a lot until all is left is actually the hide and nothing else. Okay, let's just do halacha ches, sif ches, sorich haklaf lios me'umad. Me'ubad ba'afotzim oibasid. Now, to process the klaf, you have to submerge it, you have to soak it in afotzim, in gulnut juice, or basid, or in lime. And you've got to do the ibud, the soaking of the skin before the preparation of the skin in order to begin writing on it. You have to do that lishma, the ibud, the processing, the tanning of the actual klaf has to be done lishma. And it's good to articulate it, to actually express it verbally. That you'll use it, you're doing this ibud, this processing, this tanning of the hide to prepare the klaf, the parchment. L'shem tefillin, l'shem sefer Torah. Avalim ibdo l'shem mezuzah apostle. But if you process it l'shem mezuzah, then it will be no good for either sefer Torah or for tefillin. It says the Mishnah Berurah. Ba'afotzim, we'll explain more about that in a second. Ba'afotzim o besid uleikuvahu, and this is ma'akev. If you do not do it lishma, then the parchment is no good. The mikri klaf rak diftera, then it's called something called diftera, and it's not called klaf, and it's not usable for tefillin, sefer Torah, etc. How long do you actually have to soak it in the lime or the gulnut juice? Until the hairs of the skin fall off, not by way of scraping it off, it just naturally will fall off because it's been soaked in this material. If you take it out before that time, you should not write on this skin. Diftera adayin uposel, because it's got the status of diftera and not klaf, and therefore it's posel for these purposes. And there are those who argue and say the Sofer that if it's been soaking for 4 days and the Sofer takes it out after 4 days, and the hairs are still attached to this skin, you shouldn't worry about that. But we don't ascribe this to any hair at all. Because once it's been submerged and soaked in the lime and it's been prepared properly, lo mikri diftera ayin sham, it no longer has the status of diftera, and therefore you can take it out after 4 days and then just remove any of the hair, and you can use that b'diavad. Bisvasov. So we need to say lishma, that you're doing this lishma, but not just think it, but actually articulate it. It says in the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkot Mechaftalad, Ubadiavad Dayu b'machshava. And it's sufficient with b'diavad, with a machshava, that would help, but l'chatchila you should need to actually articulate it. Now, interestingly, in Dirshu note 39, he asks the kasha from Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Take a look at 39. With regard to the writing of the tefillin, it says further on in Sivkot and Sadihei, you have to say it lishma. Interestingly, ve'ein dai b'machshava af b'di'eved, and if you think it, even b'di'eved, that's not good enough. So how come over here that again lechatchila you should process the klaf? And you should say you're doing it lishma, but if you only thought it b'di'eved, it does work. So how come here b'di'eved the machshava is enough, but when it comes to the ksiva not? So he brings the Shulchan Aruch Harav answers the kasha of Rabbi Akiva Eiger and says we can be soimech on the opinion hasovrim she'ein tzorech l'abed klaf lishma. There is an opinion which says that actually the klaf does not need ibud lishma, and we can be soimech on that in combination with another opinion of B'tzir of Das HaSefer HaTruma, who holds she'estapik lomesh she'dai b'machshava levad, etc. So he combines that with the das of the Sefer Truma, which says that shehistapik lo meshadai b'machshava levad. Okay, beseder. So there is a difference that we can be somech on those opinions that say ibud does not need to be lishma even. Okay. Let's carry on at the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkot and Chafei. Betchilas, you have to do this at the beginning of the process, i.e., when you put the skin, the klaf, into the actual juice, the sid or the gulnut, you do it at that point. For yoyse ein sorech, and you have to do it anything beyond that. Lo lahotzi b'svasov, not to articulate anything. For lo lachshov shemis avdim lishma, ela b'tchilasa belvad. Just as you put it in at the beginning of the tanning process, that's all you need to do. Va'afilu nimshach ha'ibud kama yom. Even if the ibud takes many days, because it always goes back to your initial action, and since the initial action was done, you said it lishma, that's sufficient. When you initially put the skins into the lime, not when you put it in the water beforehand, it's when you're putting it into the lime after it's soaked in water. Now you have to say you're doing this l'shem Sofer Torah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Chafov to Ketushas Chamura, because the writing for a Sofer Torah is more chamor mitfilin. For tefillin or michlal mosayim mona, and therefore, if you say that you're doing this l'shem ksiva Sofer Torah, then that would work even for tefillin. Va'afal pikein mutar l'shanos l'tefillin mezuzos, and therefore, once you've done it for Sofer Torah, it would work even for tefillin and mezuzos after ketushasam kulam mimena, even though the process for tefillin and mezuzos is not as kodesh as it is needed for a Sofer Torah. But you can't use it for anything chol, for anything mundane. Levad unless you expressly stated at the beginning of the tanning process that you're able to change your mind and to use this material for a regular, mundane, non-kodesh activity. Then you would need then you would be allowed to be mishaneh. And the correct thing is they should say the following: I'm putting these hides, these skins, in lime, l'shem kedusha Sofer Torah, va'ani masne, and I'm stipulating that I can use it for anything else. And not like the nusach that some sofrim say, l'shem Sofer Torah, tefillin and mezuzos, oishar dvarishus, that if I decide to use it for a Sofer Torah, tefillin, mezuzos, or any other purpose, the oz mistapik ma'achronim imahani, because then the achronim are masupuk if that works. And take a look at the Bir Halacha. Interestingly, he says that the Batam Hadava Kos of Bir Halacha Mishum Shebezeh Tzorich Ledin Breira, because then you have to come on to Breira. In other words, you have to say retroactively, I'm going to use it for Sofer Torah, or retroactively, I'm going to use it for mezuzah or for tefillin or whatever you eventually decide to use it for. And that's a problem because we say midaraisa there is no breira, midaraisa ain't breira, and therefore the preferred or the better lashon is that you should say ani noisin eres elu l'toich hasid l'shem kedusha Sofer Torah, and then I can decide to use it for whatever purpose. One question you can ask: what about malim b'kodesh ve'ein moridin? You're going to use it for Sofer Torah, and then you end up using it for tefillin, which is a lower level. So the footnote 43 discusses that and says that for hazmona purposes that's okay. It's not considered kol osa or birach has an ish in footnote 33. Shekavonas hamishabur lo mashelo rak she'ein l'shorim b'mayim l'shmo and she'af mishorim b'mayim l'shmo lo moel lin hemshech. So is that the right one? Sorry, it's in footnote 44. She'af pi she'ein meridin mikdusha chamur lekdusha kala kan mutzah mipnei she'ein ela hazmona, because you're just sort of preparing it. It's not actual hishtamshus. Okay, let's finish off. Chav zayin posel. So this is going on. If you did it in ibdul l'shem mezuzah, it's posel. V'lo mahani rak l'mezuzah bavad. If you said I'm only going to use it for mezuzah, then you have to use it for mezuzah only, and you cannot use it for the higher kedusha of tefillin. To kedushasa kula. Kala mitfillin, because that's a lower level of kedusha than tefillin. V'im ibed tefillin, but if you did it for tefillin, mahani afle mezuzah v'lo Sofer Torah. And if you did it for tefillin, then it works for tefillin and for the lower level of mezuzah, but not for Sofer Torah, which is a higher level. V'im ibed ha'or l'shem ritzuas. But if you prepare the leather for ritzuos, for the straps of the tefillin, lo mahani licht of parshas olav, you cannot use that that cloth to write the parshas, im os achkach klaf mehen, to kedushas and chamura, because the klaf to write the parshas is a higher level than the ritzuos. Va'afilu lasos mehen botim yesh lo manami de posel. Even to use the skin for the batim, to make the batim, again, there yesh lo that would also be possible, that would not be appropriate. To kedushas and chamura miritzua, because the kedusha of the batim, the leather of the batim, is more kodesh, is higher than the ritzua. Okay, Beseda, we'll leave it there.